of course, we're paying tribute to the advocate George Bizos this afternoon, someone who knew him in many ways as a lawyer, and I'm going to ask him if he may have actually had him argue in front of him as a judge. He's the inspecting judge for the Judicial Inspectorate of Correctional Services, Judge Edwin Cameron. Judge Cameron, also, of course, a former Justice of the Constitutional Court. Judge Cameron, good afternoon to you, sir, and thank you very much indeed for your time. If I've remembered my history correctly, you may actually have worked with George Bizos when he was representing people during apartheid, perhaps at the Legal Resources Centre in Johannesburg.
Both times, yes, Stephen. And, of course, when I started as a human rights lawyer in the early 1980s, he was one of the giants. And he was of that generation from the 1950s who, with Mandela and Tambo, saw the evils of the legal system but believed that they should be remedied and that the legal system should be put to use for social justice.
What was he like then? I mean, you described him as a giant. What was he like when you first met him?
He was a great raconteur, Stephen. He loved to tell a story, and he could tell a story at length. But he really was a lion, and I want to emphasize that about him. Two people who really knew him well, two of my colleagues who I have a high regard for, Gilbert Marcus and Caroline Nichols, they both said George was there. Some lawyers liked the highlight, some lawyers liked the foreground, whether it was a dusty magistrate's court, whether it was an unendurably long trial with very low-profile accused, George was there. He was just a dogged fighter for justice. He was immensely loyal to Madiba, his close friend. Stephen, in his autobiography, which came out just a year or two ago, he did something which was rather unnoticed in the media. He told the story of the day that Madiba was released and what happened between Dali Mpofu and his spouse Winnie Mandela on that day. And George did it simply out of loyalty because he wanted the facts to be known. And it's not a happy story. It's not one that I think we should divert into now. I only tell it because of George's enormous bond of loyalty to Madiba, his bond of loyalty to justice, which he thought he realized. He was one of the people who realized that our job had only just begun in 1994. 1994 wasn't an achievement. It was an invitation to start doing our work.
Something that I found amazing about Advocate Bizos was that he was using apartheid's laws, the apartheid system, the system written by the oppressor, against the oppressor.
Correct. That was the paradox of Mandela and Tambo, who set up their law firm in the city centre in the 1950s. It was the paradox of Arthur Chaskelson, Sidney Kentridge, all those giants who were mentors to me when I started as a greenhorn, very much later after them. And of course, if you take your legal system seriously, you've got to allow accused to be defended. And almost invariably, in 99% of cases, ANC and PAC fighters chose to be defended. And their defense had to be real. The lawyers had to have an opportunity to cross-examine. They had to argue legal points. They could take technical points. And often, we won on technical points. The past laws were eventually consigned to the rubbish bin of history in the early 1980s on almost incomprehensibly technical points that Arthur Chaskelson and Jeffrey Budlander took before the appellate division. And those technical points made it impossible for the past laws to continue to be implemented. So you're right, Stephen, that was the paradox of apartheid law. Make no mistake, in honoring George Bizos, let us remember that it was an evil system, an oppressive system that was designed to humiliate, denigrate, subordinate people. That there was just enough room for people like Bizos, Mandela, Tambo, Chaskelson, Kentridge to operate and to operate effectively.
I realize this is a strange question, but you might be uniquely placed because you worked with him as a colleague. Did he ever argue in front of you when you were sitting on the judicial bench?
Stephen, it's a good question. I became a judge at the end of 94, and George was still practicing. I think he did. He said, no, let me correct myself, and I'm sorry to be fumbling in front of your viewers and listeners. He did. When President Zuma tried unlawfully to extend the term of office of Chief Justice Sandile Ngcobo, George Bezos was in the Constitutional Court. I think he also appeared before me in a Labour Appeal Court case in the 1990s.
One of the things about him, and I watched him speak in public, but never, unfortunately, in court, was he clearly was the person who commanded attention. He was the person who you looked to, and when he stood up to argue, everybody else was just simply silent. He was the person you wanted to listen to.
Well, Stephen, you couldn't ignore him. You know, he was solid. He was irremovable. He was a motionless force that you couldn't get rid of with any force of velocity. So he was just, his courage was deep. You know, a good point that I'd like to make is that related to what I said earlier about George seeing our struggle for justice only starting in 1994, was when Morgan Tsvangirai was charged with treason after the stolen Zimbabwean election of 2002, which Mugabe stole. And the point here is that President Mbeki and his foreign minister, Minister Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, tried to paint that stolen election as free and fair. And of course, my colleagues, Deputy Chief Justice Moseneke and Justice Kampepe, would have none of it. Their report called out the fraud of that election. But the point is that even in that hostile environment, who went up to Zimbabwe to defend this unfashionable, marginalized, beaten up opposition leader in Zimbabwe? It was George Bezos. And my admiration for his commitment, for his loyalty, for his lion-hearted greatness, Stephen, is unbounded.
Judge Cameron, I do, I'm afraid, need to step away from that for a moment and ask you about this. You are the inspecting judge of the Judicial Inspectorate of Correctional Services. There have been reports in the last few days that your inspectorate is investigating a claim that a prisoner was asked to assassinate the Deputy Judge President of the Western Cape, Judge Patricia Goliath. Are you able to confirm if such an investigation is underway?
Stephen, you are extremely naughty. You're doing your job as a journalist. I was lured onto your wonderful channel with the prospect of talking about George Bezos, my mentor. Stephen, let me say this to you. We've done our job. I was approached by Judge Goliath. She had information that a prisoner in one of the correctional centers which fall underneath our fiduciary oversight had information regarding a planned assassination on her. We held an investigation. I sent to straight as arrow senior members of my executive down, and I trust their integrity and their good sense and their good judgment as well. And they concluded that it seemed that the man that they interviewed was telling the truth of what was said to him and what he overheard. Doesn't mean that it's not all hearsay. Some of it might be hearsay in lawyers' language. So we've done our job, Stephen, and I've stayed out of it. I'm inspecting judge. My job is to check on the dignity and human rights of prisoners, and connected with that, of course, is also the dignity and human rights of the personnel whom we require to guard them. So I see the functioning of the whole correctional system as being based on dignity and observance of rights. So we've done our job. I was asked by Judge Goliath to do that. We did it. The report was provided to a very limited number of persons, and I'm not going to get involved further because all the main players have got a stake in it. Judge Thorpe has got a stake in it. Judge Goliath has got a stake in it, and the matter must go further now, Steve.
I was going to try and push it a little further, but I can see I'm not going to get any further. I do appreciate the fact.
I know you're good at your job, Stephen, and I hope I'm able at mine.